Hi, everyone. Welcome to Burst's fifth general meeting. I can't believe it's already been 5 general meetings this semester. We only have one left, so it's crazy how the semester is almost over. But we're so glad you're here. We have a lot of announcements for you guys tonight, and we have 2 guest speakers for you. So really great general meeting in store. So like always, we're going to start off with a little icebreaker. So for tonight, the question is, if you could name yourself after a food item, what would you pick? So you're welcome to put your responses in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and share, you can. Okay, I see breadsticks, pizza rolls, chicken tenders, pasta. Okay, lots of carbs, which I totally love. An apple. Okay, I see someone's trying to be healthy. Tim's. Huh, I wonder if you mean the coffee. Rolls. Yeah, lots of bread. Okay. Well, we'll take these into consideration next year when we can actually have socials with food. Maybe we'll try to get some of your favorite food items and bring them to the social. Okay, and as a reminder, these are the burst officers. As always, if you have questions about research or any of the burst events, you're welcome to reach out to us and we'd love to help you out. And then the member of the bi-week is Leah Peralta. She is on the special events committee, and she's also been one of the volunteers helping us prepare for the Heart of Texas Research Conference this weekend. So congratulations, Leah, and thank you for all your work in Burst.
All right, hi everyone. Here's another overview of our points requirement this semester. We're kind of nearing that point in the semester where things start to wind down super quickly. So make sure that you're getting your points in and checking the spreadsheet as often as you can, so you're not trying to cram in a bunch of points towards the end of the semester. And HOT is coming up in 2 days, and that's the only event this semester that fulfills the special events category. So make sure that you're doing everything to satisfy that category. And if you're a part of a research lab, you're welcome to fill out the form that's linked to earn 6 points towards research credit. And then quite a few of you have already taken advantage of this. We're offering 1 general event point for applying to a research internship, and you can apply or you can send in 2 submissions for a max of 2 general events points. And then if you're a senior, you're welcome to apply for the Certificate of Excellence in Undergraduate Research. So if you fulfill those 2 requirements, you're welcome to apply at the link by April 20th, and that's an awesome thing that you can add to your resume or CV.
And for socials, the Cameron Park hike for those who signed up will be April 17th from 2 to 4. Those who signed up will get more information in their email, so stay tuned. And unfortunately, the post-meeting social tonight is canceled. Some things came up, so that won't be happening tonight.
So we have another large service event opportunity coming out specifically for stepping out. So the date and time are listed on the slide. These are the specific events that are available if you'd like to participate in stepping out. Please scan the QR code. We do need to get a head count by this Sunday at 10 p.m. So it'd be nice so that Angela and I can figure out how many of you guys are interested. But it's a really great event and I highly recommend you coming to join us.
Hi guys, here are the upcoming journal clubs. There's a journal club tomorrow. You can still fill out the link in the previous week's weekly email, and all these other journal clubs will be in the next weekly email coming out.
Hey guys, so Scientia will be released later in April, and we're having a cover design contest to pick the cover art. So if you have a picture that you think would look good on Scientia, it can be something from your lab, scientific art, a diagram. Just email me at isha_thopper1@baylor.edu. And if your picture is chosen, you will win a gift card as well as some burst swag.
All right, so as you all know, HOT is going to be this Saturday from 9:30 to 2:45 p.m. So these are all of the graduate schools that we are going to be featuring. And please join the welcome Zoom at 9:20 if possible to get some more information, get your questions answered. And of course, I'll give you all more details about how to gain credit and things like that. And this is who we're going to be featuring. So Dr. Richard Myers is going to be our keynote speaker. And we will also have a fantastic panel of students from all the different levels of PhD to postgrad, things like that. So yeah, definitely bring all of your questions and it's going to be a fun time. All right, so I'll quickly go over this and I'll also cover this the day of, but to receive credit for HOT, you will need to attend 4 poster presentations, each from a different division. So there will be 17 different divisions. So hopefully you'll find a few that you're interested in. And abstracts will be located on the HOT program. I highly recommend that you familiarize yourself with the program. So abstracts will be located on there as well as all of the Zoom links for the day. And the program can be found on the BURST website. You will also need to attend at least one graduate school informational session. Of course, the Zoom link will just also be on the program, and there will just be one Zoom link for the graduate school session, but all of the graduate schools will be in their separate breakout rooms, so you'll be able to choose the room that you want to go into. And then we'll have the graduate student panel that will only be one Zoom link, and the keynote speech will also be one Zoom link. And all of the Zoom links, once again, will be on the program. So try to familiarize yourself with that before Saturday. But yeah, that's it.
And then don't forget to submit to the 14th annual URSA Scholars Week. The deadline is coming up this Monday. And if you're presenting at the HOT conference, we will try to have all of your feedback from your presentation emailed to you by Saturday night so that you have enough time to incorporate that feedback and record a video and submit it to URSA Scholars Week and compete for even more awards. So definitely take advantage of this quintessential Baylor research event and record a video of your research for URSA Scholars Week.
All right, hello everyone. So we have a lot of academic events prepared for you guys this month and in April. So the first one that's upcoming is Monday, the CV workshop with Mr. Haynes from the BU Career Center. He's going to be teaching you about the CV and how it's different from something like a resume workshop. And so these are really helpful for your personal statements, and especially if you want to apply for like research programs or internships and that kind of thing. Second one we have for you guys is April 6th, the upperclassmen advice panel. So this one is very new from what we've done in the past, because we realized that, especially for you freshmen and sophomore, mostly freshmen, if you've never actually experienced an actual in-person class setting for college classes or test-taking environments, then it's really crucial to get some advice on how to de-stress and manage your time management a lot better. And so if you have any questions or you want to learn how to get more advice from upperclassmen on how to succeed in in-person classes, or basically like a normal college lifestyle again, feel free to come to that student panel and we'll be able to help out. Oh yes, Cole, you raised your hand. What's up? No? Okay. I'll just keep going then. If you have a question, you can feel free to just put in the Zoom chat and then we'll answer it for you. And then so we have a new date. So the pre-professional panels now officially moved to April 15th from 6:30 to 7:30. So we've been moving things around. A lot of things came up, but we have settled for a finalized date, and that is the 15th. And so we'll be inviting people from the MD background, PhD, as well as MD, PhD professors from Baylor, and just talk about their research and answer any questions you might have. And the next few upcoming workshops that don't have a set date yet or a time are the Intro to Coding for R in RStudio, as well as a personal statement workshop with the BU Career Center. Awesome. Okay, so that was a lot of announcements. So without further ado, I will now announce our guest speakers. So I'm really excited to announce that we have the privilege of inviting 2 guest speakers today. The first one we will be presenting and inviting is Yoda Shimada. He is an MD PhD student at the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, and he focuses his PhD research on department of molecular genetics and microbiology. And so for Yoda, we'll be hosting a more AMA style. And so I'll be asking a few prepared questions first. And so while I'm asking these questions and Yoda's responding, feel free to ask and think of any questions along the way. So you can put in the Zoom chat or you can unmute yourself. And the next guest speaker we have is Dr. Levin. So Dr. Levin is the University Professor of Epidemiology and Population Health. And he's also involved in the medical humanities and religion and population health programs at Baylor University. Dr. Levin is an epidemiologist and also serves as the adjunct professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Duke University School of Medicine. And Dr. Levin has been involved in lots of different fields. So he's received his MPH from University of North Carolina School of Public Health, as well as his PhD in Preventative Medicine and Community Health from the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences at the University of Texas Medical Branch. So today, Dr. Levin will be talking a little bit about his research in epidemiology, as well as some aspects of public health policy. So that was quite a bit, that was a lot. So we're gonna get started and we'll be inviting Yoda first. And so the first question we have today is, did you do your research in undergraduate years, and did that help you prepare for your current MD PhD program? And you can also feel free to introduce yourself too.
Yeah, great. Thanks guys for the invite. It's quite an honor to, as a student, to come to talk to other students or pre-meds or anybody who's generally interested in graduate school in general. Me being a graduate student, I'm actually going into my 7th year at the MD PhD program. So it's essentially at UNM School of Medicine. The MD PhD program is essentially a standard MD 4-year curriculum with 4 or 5 years of a PhD in the middle. And to give you perspective, that means after you start at school, your first 2 years will be doing didactic medical school classes and lectures, taking your step 1, followed by 4 or 3 or 5 years of PhD work. And then after that, you'd be returning back to the medical school to do your clinical rotations for your 3rd, followed by the 2nd board exam, and then 4th year for focusing on what exact clinical specialty you'd be interested in for residency, as well as residency interviews. So that's kind of how our program goes. I mean, if you guys are more interested just in how the MD PhD program works, there's a lot of different kinds, but we can talk about it later if you guys have more specific questions. In terms of the questions, so talking about the research experience in undergrad. So I graduated a long time ago. I'm actually a lot older than you guys, but I graduated from UCSD with a biomedical engineering background as an undergraduate degree. And I was always interested in research, even though I was going down a pre-medicine route. And because of that, I really wanted to do clinical research, right? You're like, oh, I want to be with the doctors or I want to be with patients. Well, unfortunately, right, not all of us get the chance to do that when we're in undergrad. However, I've done work in a physics lab. I've done research in a material science lab. I've done summer internships at different institutions, just based on interest in what was basically given to me. And also I did have 2 years of two gap years where I was reapplying and also doing more research along the way. And even during that time, I was always trying to get a lot of different kinds of research experience, and eventually leading up to getting something where I was doing a little bit of clinical research, right? But you have to understand that people make it sound like you need to do research to go into medicine, which isn't necessarily the case, especially if it's not really an area of interest, right? Because some students and some clinicians are strictly for the clinics, and they're like, oh, I want to see patients, and that's really great. That's definitely a reason to want to go into an MD program. But I do definitely think that if you're interested, kind of tiptoe around in the waters a little bit at your local institution or back home if you don't necessarily have an opportunity there, and see if there are either public labs or even private institutions that have either summer internships or just a little bit of volunteer work in a lab, and see if that kind of environment is something that interests you. You'd be surprised at how many people or med school students do undergrad research or didn't do undergrad research, but coming into med school, they're like, oh, all this research paper and medical journals, all their research is obviously generated in labs and so forth. And they're like, oh, I wish I would have had more chance to really try out lab stuff, because, you know, med school is 4 long years, you might think, but you're not really going to have dedicated time to do research unless you're really, really, really interested in it. So I think I did research. Did it prepare me for grad school? Not necessarily. Obviously, grad school is separated into the med school part and the PhD part, and then further into like the PhD part includes just lectures and studying for material, like the basic sciences for whatever department you go into. But then you also have to go to the part where you're doing a lot of synthesis and research by yourself, and also getting ready for publications and grant writing. And all these things, you usually won't get an experience to do so in undergrad. Maybe you will, maybe your professor will give you an assignment that's similar to that where you have to do that kind of critical thinking. But will it prepare you? Not really. Will you be ready? Not really, but that's actually part of, I think, going into professional schools in a lot of ways. You're not really supposed to be ready for medical school stuff before medical school, right? The idea is that you seem interested enough to where you would be spending 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years in school, and then also maybe doing a postdoc, a residency, a fellowship afterwards. So that's a good, minimally 7 years for our short residency, right? So research is great, especially if you're interested in it, keep with it and see if that is something you want to do. But does it prepare you for grad school? Not really.
Awesome, thank you. So this next question is a bit of a follow-up too. If you want to add, you can definitely do that. Did you know that you wanted to pursue MD, PhD programs during your undergrad years? And why did you decide to do that versus just doing MD or just PhD?
Right. So typically, like in my experience, I actually didn't know about the MD PhD program until like later, maybe my 3rd or 4th year, when I was actually getting ready to apply or had applied. And in the first 2 cycles, I actually didn't apply at all for the MD PhD program, just because I wasn't really sure what it was. But then I did get in contact with somebody, or in my lab, basically, we started collaborating with an MD PhD, and he's like, oh, well, you're doing research, you want to be a doctor, right? So why don't you do something like what I've done, where I have an MD and PhD, and I can do clinical work and research work. So honestly, I really didn't know about it at all, but it's good that you guys have a chance to, like, for instance, you guys have this club that can identify a local, or, now in the Zoom days, you can invite MD PhDs to come talk to you, to tell you about their career paths and things like that. So I did not know. I knew they kind of existed in a sense, but I didn't exactly know how they had done it. And obviously the generation that had initially that kind of taught me about MD PhDs didn't necessarily do it in a contiguous fashion. So like an MD PhD program. And that's also common too. So you might get your PhD, get your MD, you might get your MD, and you get your PhD. So just because you don't know, or just because it's in the name to do 2 degrees at once, you don't all have to do it at once. And that's kind of how I learned it. It's like, oh, well, I was always interested in research, but I was like, oh, if I go the clinical route, how does this all work out? And once I did get a chance to talk to people, and I liked what I was doing, obviously with the research, then it kind of all came together in my final year of applying. And yeah, I'm definitely happy that I got the chance to actually talk to somebody that was actually directly in the field that I got to work with in both a research and a clinical point. So I think that's more or less my reason why I decided to go down this path.
Awesome. This next question is, do you have any tips for choosing medical schools, and what aspect of the school, like for instance, culture or the school environment, did you prioritize the most?
Obviously this is really subjective, but me personally, in my first time applying, I kind of applied like everywhere just because I really wanted to just get in somewhere, right? And I don't know how things are recently with applications and turnover rates, but at least in my experience, it was pretty tough, even if you were to get an interview at multiple places to find a spot. And that's just kind of how, it is, right? However, choosing a medical school, you really have to personally think about what you want to get out of it. And that comes both in like a social sense, right? So if you really cherish, like for instance, your family, and for instance, I have family in New Mexico. My parents live here. So then it kind of made sense to put that on the list, no matter whether they take me or not, just because if anything, I'd be closer to family. And that did have an important factor. Other things, maybe like there's a research professor, especially for an MD, PhD, you have to do your PhD at your institution with an advisor. Therefore, if there's somebody that does research at your institution that interests you, or you've read about them in a paper, or something like that, that's academically driven, that's part of your PhD, that may be also something to consider. The other things are definitely, I wouldn't make a big deal about location unless maybe those two things are really a big factor. Like you want to go to this state, you want to go to that state. This gets a little bit more of in terms of like being any graduate student or professional student, but also financially, it's actually a very important thing to consider. Granted, it shouldn't necessarily stop you per se, especially if you're really adamant on going to medical school. Graduate school is a little bit different because usually the program that gets you, that takes you, will cover your tuition and usually give you a stipend for your research work. However, for the MD, PhD, or for just the MD, usually, unless you get a scholarship of some sort, you're going to be fronting a lot of the student loans. So that could be a big thing. The good thing about the MD, PhD program is even during my MD phase, the program does cover my tuition for the MD side, right? So basically all 8 years are covered. And I believe MSTP also has the same policy in general, because MSTP gets money from the federal government to hold the MD, PhD program at those locations. Even if they're on MSTP, the institution usually will have some kind of compensation as well as tuition covering during your whole program. So for me, that was kind of important to me, just because I didn't want to be, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. But luckily, the whole research during the MD, PhD program kind of helps pay for all that, as well as give me a stipend for living expenses. So it's essentially, in a way, to get like a full ride if you're willing to go all 8 years.
Wow, that honestly sounds like a blessing for sure. We have one person who said in the chat, they're asking, what kind of research are you doing right now?
Oh yeah, I'm glad somebody asked. I wasn't really sure if we'd have a chance to talk about it. But I do next generation sequencing technology and bioinformatics work. So whether, I don't know if you guys are first to fourth years, or you guys are all mostly undergrad students? Okay, well, even if you haven't really learned about it, hopefully you've heard about it in the news a little bit about things like PCR or next generation sequencing. My lab essentially does research and development in making new technologies that are for genome sequencing, DNA, RNA sequencing, but in ways that aren't established in industry right now. So essentially, we want to say, like, we want to determine, or we want to develop tools and different methods of sequencing genomic data from all different kinds of samples, whether it's from humans, viruses, etc., and figure out new ways and innovative ways to do that, as well as doing all the downstream analysis to try to link it to clinical ways or clinical research. So my initial project had to do with using something called a liquid biopsy, which is basically a blood draw. And from that, we would extract DNA and try to get some kind of sequencing work done. And the implication was that in cancer patients, you have a lot of cell turnover. You're just getting rid of all your immune system is getting rid of some of the cancer cells and kind of basically spitting out the destroyed cancer cells into your bloodstream. And from that, maybe we can detect cancer, detect what kind of cancer, et cetera, from there. So it kind of bridges the gap between just traditional sequencing, some cutting edge stuff that we haven't seen in papers or in practice yet, as well as developing new programs and using things like AI and machine learning to see if we can correlate what we find in the lab as models for predicting whether or not people have cancers, for instance. Other applications, I guess recently, is the coronavirus related stuff, and that's actually what my thesis is on. We've developed a new way of sequencing the coronavirus entire genome at maybe like 1/10 of the cost of what it would cost, for instance, using Illumina sequencing, which is like the industry standard for genome analysis, or at least the sequencing part of the genome analysis. And what's really cool is, at least in the last 1 year that we've been working on this project, our method has actually gotten a lot of approvals locally at UNMH as well as the VA hospital, and they're actually using our technology right now to sequence 10-fold more genome samples like locally to help aid in identifying things like coronavirus, or the kind of strain that's in the local area. So I'm really fortunate to be able to be in a lab like this, where we're really pushing the boundaries of research and clinical applications of research.
Awesome. Did you also have a lot of programming experience or like machine learning experience in your undergraduate years, or did you do most of that in your MD PhD program?
So I was doing a little bit of bioinformatics, but a lot of the things that I was using or learning in undergrad, obviously this was a long time ago, right? Because I graduated in 2012. It's useful. All the programming stuff is useful and it's very applicable and in research, but you won't, again, be completely ready or prepared for graduate school no matter what you see it. The other thing is I'm personally kind of interested in things like programming and AI and things like that. So I don't mind doing that, going the extra mile, and even learning a little bit extra in terms of, like you guys are talking about an R workshop earlier, right? And I was like, oh, I wish I had done that during undergrad, because that's exactly what I use for most of my statistical work. And I write code in there, and some of our sequencing work is done on there too, as well. So definitely being exposed to it is really good. I mean, the common ones are things like Python, RStudio. Those are definitely jack of all trades that you can use, not just for medically, but for any engineering or a lot of different research work. So knowing about them at least, or knowing the name and having interest is definitely key, but I don't think you necessarily need to do it. You don't always have to do a specific language to be good at coding. You can kind of understand the ideas behind them. Like if you kind of know what functions are or how arrays and matrices work, things like that, that can also help you. So.
Awesome. Thank you very much Yoda. Really appreciate it. If you're able to, we'll probably have some last remaining questions by like 7:28 or so if anyone else has questions. But for now, we'll try to get the ball rolling and have Dr. Levin have enough time as well. And so, Shivni, if you're able to skip a few more slides, it's just another spacer for Dr. Levin. But Dr. Levin, if you're able to, you can feel free to screen share and also start your presentation here.
Great. Yeah, I don't have any PowerPoint, so I can just can fill the screen with me. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. And thank you so much for finding a picture of me from about 15 years ago, back when I had hair. Not anymore. What I'd like to do is just give you a little bit of information about my background, about my training, and then I'll talk about some of the research that I do. I'm an epidemiologist. I've been at Baylor since 2009. My wife also is an epidemiologist. It's strange, two epidemiology family. She has had the last several years an endowed chair at BCM in Houston. She used to be on the faculty here. So we are a two epidemiologists, two chair family. I have kind of a weird appointment at Baylor. My position is at the Baylor Institute for the Studies of Religion on the top floor of Pat Neff, which is kind of a social policy think tank on faith-based issues. And so it's been confusing to a lot of people who just presume I have a PhD in religion, or I'm a religious scholar, or I'm a sociologist or something. I'm not. I'm an epidemiologist. And for the 12 years that I've been here, this is just like an ongoing joke for me. People come into my office and they see floor to ceiling walls of books on infectious diseases and microbiology and pandemics and bioterrorism. And it's like, you really are an epidemiologist? Yeah, I am. As was mentioned, I was trained in graduate schools of public health in North Carolina and in biomedical sciences. I have a PhD from the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences at UTMB, and I did my fellowship training at the University of Michigan. And then I taught medical school for about a decade in a medical school in Virginia in family medicine. So I'm unique in that I'm a scientist. I'm a biomedical scientist, but I've been trained in or worked in a public health environment, a biomedical sciences, a basic bench science environment, and taught in a clinical department in a medical school. So I'm happy with that background. I think it gives me a little bit of flexibility and gives me a little bit of insight and perspective. I initially trained as a perinatal epidemiologist. In fact, my dissertation on a topic in perinatology was funded by the AMA back in the 80s. And then I transitioned into geropsychiatric epidemiology. And because of some interest in faith issues and religion, I had written some papers and some literature reviews, and the next thing I know, it kind of turned into a focus of mine. I applied to the NIH, and 31 years ago, to the best of my knowledge and my colleagues, I was the first person ever funded by the NIH to conduct research on faith or spirituality and health. And little did I know, I've made a whole career out of it and ended up at Baylor Institute for Studies of Religion. I can't say that when I started all this, I had an intention. I was trained as a scientist, and I do other science stuff. I'll talk to you about that. But it's just been an unusual career path. Now I've been at Baylor for 12 years, and some of the current epidemiologic population health research that I'm doing. For the last several years, I've probably published maybe 9 studies, with a 10th in the works, on the physical and mental health of Jewish folks in the United States and in Israel. Our family's Jewish, and so much of the research that's been done on spirituality and faith and religion and all hasn't really focused on Jewish people. So I remember thinking, gee, I wonder if there are global surveys, population surveys, or health surveys that had data on people's affiliation. And sure enough, there were a number. And so I've published a bunch of studies in Israeli medical journals and American medical journals and psychology journals, sociology, all over. And so that's been a lot of fun. That's been an opportunity to do analysis of large global data sets. And then I've done some spin-off stuff that really, technically speaking, isn't epidemiology, but there was some data on prayer, healing prayer, in one of the national survey. So I did a paper looking at different religious differences in that, and ended up publishing a paper a few years ago. And it was incredible media. I mean, Wall Street Journal and CNN and all that, and the 700 Club. I mean, it's like a weird mix of media. The media office at Baylor loved me. I mean, I was, for about a month, I was everywhere. But I mean, that's wasn't really the mainstream of what I research. And I've done some other work. I have a lot of colleagues who are historians and sociologists and people like that, and I've collaborated with them. But really, the joy for me are those few days that I was just talking to my wife about this before. Those few days, it's like everyone thinks, well, you're a scientist, you're an epidemiologist, you're just doing this stuff all the time. Well, with teaching and committee work and lectures, I just spent 2 hours this afternoon doing a grand rounds in New York and Stony Brook, and just all these sorts of things. Media, those days when I can just close the door at Pat and F and sit down at the computer and go into my data and analyze data and write scientific papers. Those days are few and far between, and those are really those are a joy for me. There's kind of what happens in the academic world, and this may be as you guys are 30, 40 years away from worrying about this, but for those of you in an academic career, you reach a certain point in your career, a certain stature, status. I'm not saying I have great status, but I'm in an elite private school. I'm a distinguished professor, and people think, oh, this must be fantastic. You're just doing science all the time. No, there's media, there's committees, there's all this, like I said, and those days when you can just close the door and be a working scientist. This is such joy for me. Those days when I can just go in there, put on my scientist hat, and just do what I was trained to do at UT Medical Branch in Galveston all those years ago, and when I was teaching medical school in the 80s and 90s. It's such a pleasure, but that is not an everyday occurrence. So I have this whole research career doing population health, epidemiologic research, but I also, again, one of the things that comes with seniority, I'm in my 60s, so I guess that counts as seniority. I'm asked to weigh in on issues of the day and on health policy issues. So the last few years, I've written reports and asked to comment on stuff and talked to people in Washington, and been written op-eds or editorial commentaries for different journals on different important issues in public health. And just some examples. It's an ongoing Baylor, Emory, Harvard collaboration. I have a colleague at Emory named Dr. Al Neidler, and a colleague at Harvard, Dr. Tyler Vanderweel, who holds an endowed chair in epidemiology at Harvard. And we've done some work together. We've written a number of papers on the significance of FBOs, faith-based organizations, congregations, churches, mission groups, on the public health and public health issues. And we published some stuff with a special issue of the American Journal of Public Health. And we just recently wrote something on COVID-19, the extent to which faith-based groups have hindered and helped the vaccine rollout. So that's something that I've done. I've also done a lot of other policy-oriented work on roles of faith-based organizations in health promotion, community health education programs. Another paper on advocating a role for the Surgeon General of the United States. I co-authored a paper with a former assistant to the president of the Bush administration, a friend of mine who comes to Baylor a lot. So we published something. Published some stuff on federal anti-poverty efforts, editorial position paper, something on global health policy. So this is, again, this kind of comes with seniority. I wish I could say every day I just close the door and I'm doing data analysis and being a working scientist, but sometimes, my opinion is asked for, or I'm on the phone with a senator talking about whatever, related to COVID. The third thing, besides my epi research and this health policy work, the last almost exactly a year, maybe a month more than a year, because since COVID-19, since the SARS-CoV-2 virus and COVID-19, because I'm a Baylor professor and because I'm an epidemiologist, I've been doing a lot of media. It started when, I think you probably find it online, the Baylor media office like a year or so ago did a little interview with me. And at that point, COVID, it was brand new. I mean, maybe there had been 20 deaths in the United States, in the whole country. But we knew that it was something very serious. I did this interview and they put it out on the wire. And it just led to local media, national media. I was the lead story on CNN one day. It must have been a slow news day. And AARP and the Baptist newspapers. I've had pastors asking me questions, mainly news stories, interviews, things like that. On COVID in general, I did an interview. There was a big story that came out a few months ago on herd immunity. I was asked to comment on that, along with someone from Johns Hopkins and the head of the WHO, and I think Dr. Fauci was quoted. So good stuff for Baylor, good public awareness for Baylor. But also a lot of stuff specifically in relation to the faith community, how churches and pastors have really made some missteps that have caused some problems, have exacerbated the pandemic, and other ways that faith communities and people faith, especially locally, have really chipped in and have helped and have been a great contributor to health education efforts and vaccine rollout. So there's that work. So there's my research, there's policy papers, there's just media outreach, talking to people, and then finally, I write books. So this came out, this came out last year. Religion Medicine is published by Oxford University Press. Kind of it's a historical work on the history of the intersections between medicine and the faith community. And it goes back to antiquity and covers all the different points of intersection for good and for bad, because as I'm sure we all understand, the history of the story between science and religion is not necessarily all peachy. It's sort of lurid. There's the good and the bad and the ugly, and religion has been part of the problem. It's been part of the solution. These two institutions have collaborated. They've worked against each other, and so this book was an opportunity to discuss that. I have another book I'm working on. It'll be my 12th book, also for Oxford next year, on the history of healers, people that do what healing, hands-on healing, energy healing. And I have a contract, and that book will probably come out the end of next year. So that in a nutshell is what I have been up to recently, the last few years. And again, I mean, I want to stress, when you're in an academic, if I were to explain my career when I was teaching medical school in Virginia in the 90s, it was very different. I was teaching medical students, I was advising medical students, I was serving on committees. And I had NIH grants, and I was working all the time, and I was crunching data, and I was underpaid, and all the stuff that you experience as a young assistant professor who's barely past 30. It's a lot different now. And so in some ways with seniority come a lot of perks. I can kind of pick and choose what I do more. And again, you guys, those of you who are going to be academics, that comes, decades down the line. But there's a flip side. It's a double-edged sword. The double-edged sword is there's lots of things that pull me away from just that hands-on research. And like I say, if I have 10 days in a year where I can just close that door in my office on the 4th floor, Pat and F, and I don't have a do not disturb sign, but metaphorically hang a do not disturb sign and just sit at the computer and look at my data and analyze it and write tables and email colleagues and pull my medical books off the shelf and think about what this means and begin writing up the results. Those, for me, that's heaven on earth. I mean, my image of heaven is something like that, just being a scientist. I love it. And in fact, it's funny, I joke with my colleagues at the Institute for Studies of Religion that some days, this happened more and more a couple of years ago, but some days I just would need to walk over to the Baylor Science Building and just walk around, just get a sandwich or get a coffee or get a Witch or something, just because I just needed to be in the building. I told my friends that I just need to be around my peeps. I just need to feel the energy, get a little of that left brain going. Because as a scientist, we typically work out of our left brain, and religious scholars may be on the other side of the brain. So if you ever see me wandering the halls, the BSB, it's just like I've just got to get away from Pat and F for a little bit. But now I've been teaching in medical humanities. I have a secondary appointment there, and every couple of years or so, I teach a seminar. But I advise honors theses and do guest lectures and stuff. So that's my story, and I'll be happy to entertain questions. And I reserve the right to say I don't know, but I'll do my best.
Dr. Levin, actually, one person has a question in the chat. So do you have any advice for students who are interested in entering a field about epidemiology or healthcare policy, and how to get more involved during your undergrad years?
Yeah, I have different levels of advice. I'll try to come up with all of it. Well, we now finally at Baylor, after many years, we have a Robbins College of Health Science. When we came here, we didn't have a College of Health Sciences. We have a Department of Public Health with a division of Epi and a division of community health education. These didn't exist when I came here. As far as epidemiology, take classes. We now have at least 5 or 6 professors over there. Perhaps there's opportunities to help them with the research grants, other things like that. As far as health policy in the business school in Hankamer, isn't there there's like a health policy institute or a center, health services research, same thing. See if you can take classes, see if you can get involved at that level, get to know professors, maybe help them with their work. I don't have any insight onto how to gain that entree other than talking to people and other than taking coursework. Now, in general, a career as an epidemiologist, I remember my wife and I both spoke to one of the pre-med groups several years ago, before you guys' time here. And the same question arose. Epidemiology is typically something you do beginning at the master's degree level, master's and PhD. I don't know places you can get a bachelor's degree in epidemiology, but you can certainly there are intro courses in epi, both Dr. Peltzer teaches intro epi course in the Robbins College, and then Dr. Schultz teaches the course for arts and sciences. And these are great courses. Sociology department is a course in population health. So you can take courses, but more to the point, especially since this is a science tech kind of group, if I had it to do over again, I would have taken more biological sciences. If you want to be an epidemiologist, and remember, most people who are epidemiologists aren't weirdos like me who papers on religion and faith and health policy. They're real epidemiologists like my wife. And the more micro, so this is what I'm getting to. The more microbiology you can take, the better. I think molecular biology, microbiology, genomics, this is the sorts of things that come into play in the modern epidemiology. It's been said, and I kind of agree with it, that the foundation stones for being a good epidemiologist, first of all, you have to understand the life of pathogens. So if you take microbiology or virology, something like that. Secondly, biostat. If you go to graduate school, if you go to medical school, you're going to have to take biostat. And it's going to kind of be like a watered down, medical school, baby biostat, enough so that you can interpret journal articles. But if you really want to go on in public health and epidemiology or in health policy, you need to take some biostat. And I know that's really aversive to a lot of students. I was the same way. I was like, oh God, I don't want to take stat. But it's really good. And some people, even that are maybe a little math phobic, stat's totally different. And for those of you who have stat, you know this. If you're like thinking, oh, it's just like be like calculus or whatever. No, stat, it's like logic. It's like more philosophy than it is just pure math. It's so much fun. Biostat's fun. And so the more biostat you can get, the better. The more micro and things like that, the better. And then the other thing, the third piece is kind of demography, social demography. And again, there's a course in the sociology department on population health, which I think covers a lot of kind of social demography and studies of how socioeconomic characteristics and physical characteristics, how rates of health and illness, morbidity and mortality and disability vary. I think that'd be very valuable. So those 3 areas are things that I would say to focus on, and you'll be in real good stead. Then by the time you get to graduate school, you'll be very prepared. And it also might help you get into a real good graduate school because they'll see, wow, you already have the foundations. That's fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Levin. We have one more question for you. You mentioned your research collaboration with Emory and Harvard. Can you talk a little bit about the results and main findings of that research?
Sure. Well, a couple of ongoing things. At this point, my colleagues at Emory and Harvard, we basically have been commissioned to write policy-oriented works, to edit things, to write editorials, do all of that. So we've been doing it. So my findings are, I mean, in a nutshell, we've simply narrated the history of how the faith-based sector has been involved in public health and how it can have greater involvement in sponsoring health promotion programs, in promoting well-being. We wrote an op-ed piece. It's currently under review, so I mean it hasn't been published yet. That was solicited for us by the editor of a major journal. The contributions that faith-based groups can have to working against vaccine hesitancy and encouraging the success of the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine rollout. But now the second thing, I didn't really mention this, but this is more significant. We have maybe it'll be announcement in the next month or two. I don't want to jump the gun, but a major research initiative, a Baylor, Harvard, Gallup organization research initiative that will involve our group at Baylor, at ISR, Dr. Vanderweel's group at Harvard School of Public Health and Harvard Medical School, and the Gallup organization is polling. We will be doing global population surveys in like 22 nations in the world, collecting data on population health and human flourishing, and every psychological, social, economic, political, and spiritual variable you can think of. And we will be spending the next 5 to 10 years analyzing these data. So we haven't done the work yet, but that it hasn't happened yet, but that work should be starting. We expect to be starting this summer, and this will be a major. When it happens, it'll be a major get for Baylor. It's maybe the largest research-funded program in the history of the university. But it hasn't happened yet, so I probably get in trouble for even bringing it up. But this will be an ongoing research project, and the potential is there, as opposed to the work that I do just sitting in my office at Pat and F analyzing data. Once this thing rolls out, I could see, I mean, we're going to have postdocs, we're going to have graduate students. I could even see the possibility, at least a year from now, of possibly even, undergraduate student interns or whatever. I can't say that definitively, but we'll be a full-blown Baylor Harvard research shop doing global population health. So I'm very excited about that. But in the meantime, I've still got my other stuff to do, and I'm working overtime. That all of us at ISR are trying to clear our desks of all our ongoing stuff, so that if we get this grant, we can really hit the ground running. So just put that on hold. But the potential is maybe starting next year. There's opportunities for undergraduate students. I don't know, at least certainly for honor students, maybe to do theses and stuff like that. Maybe.
We'll be excited to hear about the updates too. Let's see, Shivneet, do we have time for one more question?
Yes, we can do one more.
Okay, Dr. Levin, we have one more question in the chat. So as both an epidemiologist and someone that studies religion, where do you stand about people using religion as their reason for specific beliefs about coronavirus?
I just spoke for 2 hours on that at Stony Brook. What do I think about? Well, this is boy, I could talk for hours on that. I think there's been the pulpit, and by that I mean the faith sector in the broadest sense, individual congregations, pastors, lay people, and this has been reinforced in blogs and the internet. It's been reinforced, especially with social media. Lots of misinformation and disinformation has gotten out there, and I think that the results have been tragic. We've had situations where, beginning last spring, where certain churches, and not just churches, Jewish synagogues, mosques in Iraq, I mean, everybody bears the blame, have really failed to be careful and abide by public health guidelines. And as a result, there have been super spreader events. People have gotten sick, people have died. The worst example of this, and maybe you guys saw the story, there was a story last spring, there was an independent Pentecostal church outside of Baton Rouge that were just adamant. The virus was a hoax. It was I don't know what, it was a Chinese conspiracy, it was a Jewish conspiracy, it was whatever it was. And didn't exist. And at any rate, we aren't going to wear masks. We're going to just rely on God. And it was actually a year ago this week. It was Easter, and so they had hundreds of people into their church on Easter. No distancing, no masks, including a gentleman, I don't remember his name. He was the attorney. There were lots of lawsuits in the state of Louisiana over this. The attorney that was representing the church in court as they were adjudicating this issue, and the attorney at Easter services became infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, ended up with COVID-19 and died. So the attorney actually, I mean, this is beyond tragic. And the church and the pastor just doubled down. They didn't let that stop them. And we've seen instances in Brooklyn and New York in the Williamsburg neighborhood of ultra-Orthodox Jews, the Haredi Jews, you know, the guys with the black hats and the long black, you know, running rampant and burning cars and saying, no, we aren't going to abide by any of this. And in those communities, people don't go to services once a week. They go to services 3 times a day, 2 or 3 times a day. And then they live in multi-generational households with 16 kids. And so it's decimated that community. So it's just terrible. So this is a long-winded answer. I think that, as I wrote in one of the papers I published on this, religion has been part of the problem, but it's also been part of the solution. And whereas all these, I mean, you can Google these news stories, you can find terrible news stories like this for the last year. What doesn't get as much publicity are communities of faith, including in Waco, interfaith groups, church groups, filling a pastoral role, being of service, feeding the hungry, you know, getting people doctor's appointments, visiting lonely people, helping people get medical supplies, bringing them meals, giving them rights to get a vaccine, people acting ethically, people from ministers speaking out for social justice, for justice, you know, doing their best to work against some of the hate that's been directed at Asian Americans over the coronavirus. I mean, it's just terrible stuff. They've really been a voice for that in this community, and also serving as a source of positive messaging. People trust their pastors. They go to church for information. So pastors really have an obligation to speak truth and be a source of positive. I mean, I've also run into pastors locally. One that told me he saw something on the internet that if you would just aim a hair dryer down your throat, it would kill the virus. I mean, and then was telling his congregants this. So, I mean, it's a terrible situation. And then finally, pastorally, ethically, and I think there's a moral issue. One of the things that I wrote, I said, this whole experience for us has been kind of a natural experiment in what Roman Catholics will call moral theology. I mean, it's an opportunity to kind of speak with a prophetic voice and help our brothers and sisters be safe and do the right thing and help the health of the population. And the faith community has done a tremendous job at this. But again, there's both sides of the messaging. And so religion, I don't know what you can say, is religion as a whole been a positive or negative force? It's been both, just as it's been throughout history. Just as religion has been throughout history in every domain of life, not just medicine, politics and economics and everything else in society. It's been on both sides of the issue here. So I don't think that there's an easy answer, but especially, you know, we're Baylor. So we're a faith community. And I think many of us probably have seen how our own congregations or our own faith groups have really stepped up to be very supportive and to help people, especially people in need, people that don't have resources. And at the same time, I'm sure we've all seen the stories of really, you know, terrible stuff and terrible messaging going on out there. So the answer is it's doing both. But I prefer to be optimistic and think that it's doing more good than bad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Levin. And also thank you to Yoda as well. We all really, really appreciate you guys coming today and talking about your research as well as advice for all of us. If anyone else has any questions for Dr. Levin or Yoda, feel free to email me and I will try my best to sort those out. But otherwise, as you can see in the Zoom chat, Angelo has put in the sign out link, and Shamik, if you want to close up, you're more than welcome to.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what Joyce said. Thank you so much, Dr. Levin and Yoda, for being here today. We really appreciate you talking about your research with us. If you still need the sign-in form, here it is. And just a reminder that the post-meeting social is canceled. So yes, that's all. Thank you guys for being here, and we'll see you at the next first event, which is going to be the conference this weekend.